Hello and welcome to the Property Roundup here on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we chat to industry experts to get a view on activity on the ground and about new trends emerging. This show is sponsored by daft.ie, Ireland's most visited property website. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by returning guest Majella Galvin, Chartered Surveyor, Estate Agent, Registered Value and Director with DNG Galvin Auctioneers in Bandon. Majella, thank you so much for joining us again today. I'm delighted to chat to you again because there has been another month of mixed media commentary and it is so confusing for people to get a handle on what's happening on the ground.
Great to join you, Carol. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a constant, I suppose. It's constantly changing. There's a lot of complexities and buyers are finding it very challenging, yet sellers are finding it challenging as well. I suppose a big issue, like there is a lot of demand for property out there. We're not seeing a slowdown, and supply is really struggling, particularly in the second-hand market. And you also take new homes, like they're more in supply in more urban areas than they would be out in the rural areas. So, it's an all-round low supply. And like if you look at the second-hand market, we would have a lot of people who are thinking of selling, but they're putting it on the long finger because they're looking to find a property first, which is a bit of a trap, because I can understand there's a fear that if they sell their property, where will they go? But the other side of the coin is, if they haven't got their property in the market and haven't got its sale agreed, and they do see their dream home, they won't be in a position to put in a valid offer on it. So, sellers need to realize, I suppose, as well, that the time it takes to prepare a property for sale.
Well, look, that's definitely something that we're going to discuss today, because that particular scenario you describe is one of the most common queries that we get into the show, or that we get across our social media at iPropertyRadio. It's the situation, I think, where people are most struggling with. And, it's funny, we always think of first-time buyers having their struggles, but actually there's a lot of support there for first-time buyers. But for those trading up or down, irrespective of the circumstance, whether they're doing it kind of with trading up with a young family or trying to trade down and stay within their local community, between rising interest rates, really low supply and demand that just doesn't seem to be waning at all. Every category of home buyer right now has their challenges. So we're definitely going to get into that. But actually, what I want to talk about first is you've mentioned there's no slowdown in demand, which is just not what we predicted or expected or would have really been able to forecast 2 or 3 years ago. We would have thought that the pent-up demand from during lockdown would have to ease off at some point, and that just doesn't seem to be happening. So let's break down the demand, particularly that you're seeing in the Cork market. Who's buying? Who's ready buying?
So, Carol, first-time buyers are very active, but again, there's a lot of support out there with Help to Buy schemes, and they're mainly going for the new builds and the A-energy rated homes in order to get the green mortgages and the Help to Buy scheme, as I was saying. But there's a lot of families looking to trade up. They want the bigger garden, they want the fourth bedroom, the family is growing, and they're finding it very difficult to trade up. Because sourcing another property, the majority of those people want to stay within the locality where they're close to the kids' school, but just that space. I suppose we're also finding in West Cork as well that there's a lack of detached houses within close proximity of the towns. So it's
that it seems incredibly unfair to the cohort of say perhaps younger families that are looking to trade up, because I think as a nation we need to accept some bit of responsibility for selling the generation a decade ago a bit of a lie about starter homes. And I think that people wouldn't have bought the homes they bought if they had known they were going to be stuck in them, or they were going to be stuck in negative equity. And I appreciate that's the nature of the market, but I feel that maybe there should be some easing or some better mortgage terms for those who are not technically first-time buyers, but they maybe bought first-time buyers at the height of the market, have been in negative equity almost ever since. you know, they have perhaps at this stage started to settle down, want to start a family, need to move for their jobs, and they're at a huge disadvantage when, you know, for all intents and purposes, they are like first-time buyers. And it just feels very unfair, the situation they're in, just because of the age they're at or the milestone they hit a decade ago.
Yeah, that's very true. They're in a very challenging position. I mean, I was listing a property today actually for a young man. He was only in his late 30s. He bought the property 2 years ago, and he was going abroad. So, you know, there's people don't realize the different scenarios that are out there. Another active segment in the market is people looking to downsize. We've seen a lot of increases in sales appraisals for downsizers. And I suppose the main learning thing there is they're looking for something that's not out there at the moment. And like practical, they're looking for it to be within walking distance of the town. They're looking for a home, a bungalow, preferably, you know, with a bedroom downstairs. But that kind of stock aren't out there. And what we're finding, if they are out there, they probably need a refurbishment and upgrading. And people, you know, downsizers don't really want to go into that project. The other side of it is it's very hard to get labor to actually carry out projects like that. So it is really, really tough on all segments of the market.
Jerry, you've touched on a couple of real trigger points for people there. So I'm going to break them down one by one. So let's start with the first-time buyers, because actually just this week, you know, the data from the Mortgage Federation came out and it showed that first-time buyers are far and away the most common type of buyers securing a mortgage at the moment. And I was trying to break down and interrogate that data to try understand, are there more first-time buyers buying now, or are there fewer other home buyers buying now? And it wasn't really clear to me. So I'm, you know, just when you talk about maybe the first-time buyers having that bias for new builds and A-rated homes, is that because that's the supply that's coming to the market now, because we know the second-hand supply isn't coming to the market? Or, you know, are first-time buyers coming in to you, when they come into you and they have their mortgage for the locality they're looking for, are their mortgages aligning with what the new builds are selling for?
Yeah, I suppose first-time buyers, because of the schemes that are going, like the Help to Buy scheme and things, they're naturally going to try and get a new build to benefit from that. Like if they go to a second-hand property, they're going to lose that. So, you know, that is an element. The other side of it is, again, the stock in the second-hand market simply isn't there. First-time buyers really, in general, they want a turnkey property. So, you know, there's also more increased environmental awareness. People want to go into the energy rated home and have nothing to do anymore. You know, so yeah, first-time buyers are active, but there is a certain segment of the market that they're active in.
You know, it's interesting, and I know that this won't be a very welcome comment for me to make for our industry, but the reality is new builds are more expensive. Second-hand homes, where they're available, particularly derelict properties or something, can represent much better value for first-time buyers. So, you know, I feel that if you have a first-time buyer who's willing to put up with a little heartache, they will probably end up with a very good property if they're willing to put the work in. But as you say, they tend to want the turnkey now at the moment. But sometimes, you know, I really was conflicted when there was that kite flying before the budget this year as to whether Help to Buy schemes should be expanded. And I really was conflicted as to whether we needed to just support new builds or look to the second-hand. And on balance, because of the lack of supply and because we still need to ramp up the number of new homes delivery, I felt that it was best to leave to leave well enough alone and to incentivize the new builds. But
that's a very good point.
It feels unfair. It feels unfair.
Yeah, it does. But it's a very good point you made there, because, you know, it's not just they want turnkey homes, it's what they can get the best mortgage rates for. So if they were to buy a property that requires work or being derelict, it's very hard for them to get a mortgage, almost impossible. So, the government really needs to look at something to provide support. I mean, I know there's the vacant property grant and there's the derelict property grant, but that's no way adequate for the support that's needed.
Well, Joe, I'm glad you brought them up because actually they're ones I do want to touch on with you. So maybe first give us an idea for what areas, I know you're based in Bandon, but what geographic areas do you cover?
So we cover quite a large area. We cover from Cork, Bandon, Kinsale, Clonakilty, all out West Cork.
Okay. And so in terms of the level of, say, vacancy or dereliction, would you have an idea about what is the current level of vacancy or dereliction there? And I suppose, and I know it's difficult to get those numbers. I mean, it's difficult for the government to get those numbers, so it's very hard for anyone else to have them. But I'm just trying to gauge, would it be above or below average for kind of nationwide stats?
I think we're probably about average, Carol, to be honest, again, depending in different towns and things, but like the viability of doing those projects up is just financially not viable at the moment.
Um, I understand. Sorry, I know you're saying they're not viable, but I have a difficulty with the vacant home schemes, and it's difficult for me to admit that because I was one of the people that championed them and lauded them coming in and was delighted with it. Until we actually went to get down to the practical application of it. And the practical application of it is that most of these properties are in a state that you cannot get a mortgage on because we effectively only have three mortgage lenders. Like it just makes no sense to me at all that we are allowing a situation in the current housing crisis where we have so many financially capable people who want to buy homes that we have a contracting mortgage market. That just doesn't make sense. But the fact that actually mortgages are not always available on the condition of these properties or the location of these properties. So if you have any little pot of money at all, you have to use it. Even if the property is cheap, you have to use it to buy. And actually the grant doesn't get paid out in phases. It's you finish all of the work and then you have to get everything signed off and then you draw down the money. And in fact, I actually I've spoken to a couple of vacant homes officers to see if I'm missing something about the application process. And they've said to me, indeed, that's exactly it, that the only people that they had seen who were able to avail of it were people who either owned or inherited the house. So as in, if you need to get a mortgage, then chances are you won't be able to do up the property. I had one vacant homes officer in one county council say to me, but find a builder who will do the work and pay when you draw down the money. And
yeah,
that was just the most off the wall thing I've ever heard. Like, and unfortunately, that's the kind of disconnected thinking that makes these schemes, while great in theory, absolutely beyond useless in application. And then it feels to me like the credit union is the nation's backup. So it's incredibly unfair. So I suppose as an estate agent, are you ever in a position of selling those particular properties to people who might want to do them up but are just not in a position to do them up?
Absolutely. But I think if we have a vacant property now, and I've sold quite a few of them that require work, the main interest you will get is from an investor who is the cash buyer. Mm-hmm. Who can afford to do it up and claim back the grant after. I mean, when you see the prices obviously are a bit lower range for these kind of properties, you'll get lots of calls from first-time buyers and things. But when you go down to the mechanics, I'm always straight and say, I think you're going to find it hard to get a mortgage here, or almost impossible. I've never seen one to be able to get a mortgage on it yet. So while it's there to help people, get on the market, it's actually, it's not doing it. Then investors, some of them are, I suppose, quite reluctant because they'll have to hold on to the property for 10 years. Now, at least they can rent it out now, but, there's that catch as well.
I'm so glad you've actually articulated that, because actually I ask every guest where we have this discussion, I ask them, have any of your clients been able to successfully do this? Have any of your buyers, have you been a witness to any one successful transaction? No. The answer is always no. So actually, we have a scheme that is just so badly needed across rural Ireland in in the home I'm living in while we wait for planning permission, I live on a lane where for every one lived-in house, there is maybe a 1960s farmhouse that is vacant, and then there is maybe a century-old ruins of a cottage that is derelict. And the thing is, I would absolutely adore to do one of those, as would so many people I know. So it's actually very frustrating that this is needed. So it's not like a pie in the sky kind of harebrained idea. This is absolutely something that is needed. And just there was no user experience. And this annoys me a little bit because we're involved very much on the technology side as well. And I believe that if we had a UX, if we had an experienced designer from talking through a process like this, they would actually map the journey that people would have to go through. So therefore they'd know, okay, when do they need to have the money to buy this element? When do they need to pay for this in order to be able to successfully go through the entire journey? And that's what mapping a customer experience is, or a user experience. And I genuinely think that the government has the best of intentions, and I think that some really good radical ideas, and they get a lot of criticism. But actually, I've seen some real radical thinking from this current government, but they're not thinking about the user experience at all. They don't seem to understand, and so therefore the schemes they introduce can only be relied on from people who have wealthy parents who can back them to do it, and that is a fundamental unfairness. And it feels like we're consistently hammering that home. But look, that's a problem neither you or I are going to be able to solve today. But let's talk about the people you mentioned there about downsizing and right sizing. And that's a really interesting one at the moment, because if we cracked that nut, we could unlock a huge amount of supply. So,
absolutely. And the type of supply that families are looking for, they have that extra space, and ideally you could nearly do a swap situation if the market flowed right. But what I do notice is people are being prepared more, like in the downsizing sector. Like, they're not waiting till they're in a position that they actually have to. I've people coming in to me in their 60s say, well, we want to do it now while we're fit and able.
Did you see recently, and I can't remember which estate agent it was, but actually I think it might have been a Sheriff Fitzgerald's agent in Howth in County Dublin. But they actually advertised a swap. They had somebody who had a beautifully positioned home, but a small home not suited to their growing family needs, but by the sea, absolutely beautiful. And they have looked for a home, they couldn't find something, and they're not willing to sell their home unless they can find something, because they are committed to the area. And I think actually the home buyer in question, or the homeowner in question, might have been part of the Coast Guard or some of the so needed to be within proximity to the coast and to the area. But I thought it was a really creative way to do it. They actually promoted this as a potential swap. And so it might be a swap where either party will have to compensate the other if there's a difference in value. But the most important thing, that this person who had a lovely home, beautifully positioned home, needed to sell their home, they needed to buy somewhere else, and they needed to be in the same area, and they just couldn't find something in their area. So actually, by putting it out as a swap, I thought was very smart, because, and I must follow up to see how that is going, it's only very recent, but by advertising a swap, they might just trigger interest with people who are sitting in a home, who might have the back of their mind be thinking about downsizing, but looking at the options, didn't see anything on the market for them. So they would never have maybe approached an estate agent or even asked for a valuation or done anything formally about selling. But by knowing that there's the potential to swap and end up in a home within walking distance of the village, by the sea, that's much smaller than their current home, but right within their community, they might be interested.
And we've also experienced a number of off-market sales, so, where we have the list of properties and we access our own internal database. And DNG also became part of Hamptons International this year. So we have that global database now, and we have sold a number of homes this year off market. So there is different avenues around selling your property.
Majella, will you talk to us a little bit more about that? Because I think both buyers and sellers are really intrigued by off-market transactions, and some people like to believe it doesn't happen. Whereas we know it happens in all market types. It's been happening for definitely the last 2 decades that I'm aware of, but probably long before that. Can you talk to us a little bit about how they happen and maybe why people don't want to put their home on the open market?
Well, like in the experiences we had there now this year, like we had somebody approach us, say that they were thinking of selling, kind of saying to us, if you know anyone looking in this area, but we don't want to go public with it. So it was, I suppose, for them as a seller, there was no big commitment. But yet, when I looked at our database and when we looked at our international database, we could spot a few buyers, and I was able to go back to the seller and say, look, we have 3 people here who would be interested in viewing it. We did the 3 viewings and, we successfully sold the property without going to the market.
Fantastic. And for the buyers, I suppose that really only works if a price can be achieved. So I remember during the crash and in the early days of recovery, we would have seen a lot of off-market sales, and generally speaking, they were below market value. But in such a buoyant market, I think it's really important, to get the price point right, and that actually sometimes that level of convenience is a premium, not a below market value.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me a little bit?
And don't get me wrong here, Carol. We would always encourage to go on the market because you have a clear mind. This is the best price I can get. But you've some kind of like unique properties as well that when you have, I suppose my job as an agent is to estimate the market value of it. And when I know I've achieved that price, I will talk to the seller about it. And, we both know that they were happy with the price. But if somebody is selling a property, you're still the best option is to go out in the open market.
Yeah.
But from a buyer's perspective, buyers love the idea of it on an off market. I suppose it's exciting for them. They think that they're the only one in the door, and it can make the process very easy. Because I'd have a number of buyers that would say, is there offers on a property? Is there a bidding war going on? And they just don't want to enter them anymore, the majority of people.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I understand that. I think it's really frustrating, and particularly for inexperienced buyers. But I think what we have to remember is that even if you're not a first-time buyer, for most people, they're only going to do this transaction 2 or 3 times in their lifetime.
Absolutely.
So basically, everybody's an inexperienced buyer when it comes to buying and selling a home. Because even if you've experience of doing it 7 years ago or 11 years ago, you don't have experience of the market today. So I think we maybe need to get that fallacy out of our head. The reality is that every home buyer, really, if they're only doing it a couple of times in their life, they're an inexperienced buyer in the current marketplace. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I was really keen to talk to you today, because a lot of what we do through iPropertyRadio is around, education the market sounds a little bit moralistic, but actually what we're really trying to do is share the experiences, kind of take away the curtain, see what's happening on the ground. So a little bit like you telling us about that off-market transaction or why people would choose to do that, just to really try to understand what's happening on the ground, because that's the difference between an experienced buyer or seller and an inexperienced buyer and seller, or an infrequently experienced buyer and seller. So you're doing something really fantastic, and you're offering property clinics. So you might just tell us a little bit about that. Well, first of all, is it for buyers or sellers or both?
It's for both. So at the moment, we're doing them online property clinics. We invite in different professionals. It could be a solicitor, it could be a builder, it could be an engineer who are involved in the property transaction. And the idea is to educate people about the process, because I feel the more clients know about what happens next, the smoother the process will go for everyone. So in January, we're actually opening them up to in-person, and members of the public can come in. They can have their chat with the expert in question, a casual chat, no obligations, just to, you may not be selling your home at all. You maybe just want to know what's happening in the market, just that casual chat. And I think it's just to, I suppose, take pressure off people. Like if they feel that if they call an agent, they're under pressure. it's not. It's solely to educate people and let them know what's happening in the market.
So what kind of topics do you have planned? Because I know I've spoken to you previously and you had some really great advice for sellers who were thinking about selling, because I suppose in the I don't say olden times, a couple of years ago, a decade ago, we would have only been thinking about getting your property ready. There was that old fashioned thing of baking bread and fresh flowers,
Yeah.
which, by the way, absolutely works. So sometimes the cliches are cliches for a reason.
Yeah.
So still do that, even though it's old advice. But there's so much more now in terms of not just physical staging, but you can do digital or virtual staging. But actually, now we know that, yes, that's important from the first impressions point of view, but actually the thing that really causes delays in a transaction comes down to title. So you might just talk about maybe the advice that you're giving, the advice that you're giving people who are looking to sell second-hand homes at the moment.
Yeah, like as I say, we always go through the preparation stage, I always call it. So like we'll go through the fact that they have to declutter, what repairs they need to get done. And I would often advise I'd always advise them to contact their solicitor before they go on the market, because they'll need to sort out the title, the boundaries, all the legal issues, because it's these issues that slow down the process. You could take it, for example, if you had a rural house and you had the septic tank wasn't registered. It's before you go on the market, you need to be tackling those areas. Planning is another one. You could have built an extension that was over the adequate square footage and got no planning permission for it. Or I suppose another one is you may have got planning permission, but the standard of work may not have been up to building regulations. People get tricked in all these situations, and it's only for kind of front loading all this before you go on the market that you can safeguard yourself. Like there's occasions when I would say, if I notice boundaries or mapping issues is a big one as well, I'd say I think you should get your engineer in to have a look at this before we go on the market.
Are these the kind of topics that you're going to be covering in the in the seller clinics?
Absolutely. So we will have an engineer in, we will have somebody talking about planning, we will have professional declutterer in, we will have a home stager in, we'll have somebody talking about building energy ratings, and we'll have a solicitor, of course.
Very good. Well, that's the sellers covered. And I suppose for the buyers, you mentioned earlier about the difference, say, with first-time buyers, not just all of the different schemes and grants that are available. And actually, there's, to be fair, I think the department has done great work. The Department of Housing has done great work in actually letting first-time buyers know about their schemes, but it just doesn't seem to be filtering down. Or maybe people are just not so much slow to engage, but they just assume that these schemes are very complex when actually they have been made much simpler in recent years. Will you be taking home buyers, whether they're first-time buyers, through those?
We will. So we actually have a number of speakers booked since last week, coming in the spring, that'll take them through each scheme. We'll also have mortgage brokers in, and we'll also have somebody talking about the vacant property grant and explaining the stages, and as you say, going through what journey they need to do, just so it's all about the education of it so that they're prepared.
Well, I'm really delighted to hear that. So make sure that if anybody is in the audience who has actually tried to avail of that scheme, make sure they ask those questions, because we absolutely want to communicate that these are good schemes. We need them to work. And by the way, we've seen through different schemes when they were maybe they weren't implemented as workable as they should be. When there was low take up within a year or 2 years, there was changes to the process. So actually, that's probably the kind of thing we needed. I'm conscious of your time, so the last thing I want to touch on, you mentioned it earlier about green mortgages. How like I in my experience, home buyers, whether they're first time buyers or people trading up or investors, they're extremely savvy. They're extremely knowledgeable about the local marketplace. They know every property, and they know every property that was on the market and what it sold for and everything that's on the market now. But they tend to be a little bit scared about mortgages, and that seems to be the thing they don't research so much. So you mentioned green mortgages. what's the take-up of that in your experience? And I understand you're not a mortgage broker, so it's just maybe from the home buyers you're dealing with.
And that's why I think I'd always recommend people that would work with a mortgage broker that would know the market and that would be able to get the best rate for them. Now, when I say green mortgages, they get a lower interest rate if they buy a property that's a B3 or higher. So, it's much more enticing for them, hence why the higher energy properties are selling better.
Very good. So I presume there's going to be a nice bit of mortgage chat covered in your seminars.
Absolutely. And what we'll also be doing is we'll be sharing those in our YouTube channel, obviously not personal ones, but just chats with myself and the talker. So we will get the knowledge out there.
Oh, I'm delighted to hear that. Majella, I think it's a fantastic initiative. And I know you've already started doing it and the in-person ones kick off in 2024. But the demand for knowledge is so strong, and we want buyers and sellers to be really armed with information so that they understand. And because there's a lot of frustration in the marketplace. And I think when there's mixed media messaging, it just adds to the confusion and it adds to the sense of frustration and maybe anger. And just sometimes information is the way to diffuse that a little bit. So I think it's fantastic that you've taken.
I think Carol, you said it quite rightly there. I think the problem is we've too much information, and it's just what's relevant is information to these people is what we want to get out there.
Fantastic. So when or how can people register or see what's coming up and make sure they get involved?
What you can do is if you visit our website, www.dnggalvin.ie, I write weekly blogs addressing all these topics. And you can book a slot on that and do a one-to-one with me, and I'll let you know when we'll have all the updates there. We'll also share them on our social media. But if you book in with us, we'll certainly get your questions answered.
Oh, fantastic, Majella. And from our perspective at iPropertyRadio, we'll be happy to support them and send them around, because I think that this is really information that we want every home buyer and home seller to have. So thank you so much to yourself and the team for taking the initiative. And thank you for taking the time to talk us through all that today. It's always fascinating to hear what's happening on the ground. So thank you so much for your time.
It was lovely talking to you, Carol. Thank you.
My pleasure, as always. That was Majella Galvin, Director of DNG Galvin and Chair of the SESI Southern Region. Is that still the case, Majella? Are you?
It is, yeah.
That was I know that was from our previous call, so delighted about that. My thanks to producer Carol Tallon and to the production team at Hear Me Roar Media, and also huge thanks to our show sponsor daft.ie, Ireland's most visited property website. Also, thank you to you for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Property Roundup. In the meantime, please be sure to check out all of the other Irish and international real estate and construction shows on iPropertyRadio.